suddenly got a compassionate release granted. Monday night, he left prison. He was 27 years in federal prison, which he had just followed 7 years in state prison.
All right. Don't give the punchline away though.
The punchline is,
Don't give it away. Don't give it away. Don't give it away. Don't give it away.
You'll love it. You'll love it.
All right. All right. It better be a good fucking story, Craig. That's all I can tell you.
Roll, please.
It better be good. Be worth it. That's all I can say. All right, but yeah. So they're going to be letting people in now. And then we'll just sort of shoot the breeze for a couple of minutes to give people who are laggards getting in, and then we'll start. And we have it all set out. So just have some fun and say whatever the hell you want to say. There's no right or wrong.
Welcome to the yard.
Welcome to the yard. Let's do it. Where's the music?
Getting ready for that wreck move.
We're getting ready to move.
Good time.
Recall.
Recall.
Don't check your watch. They're never on time.
Never on time. That's why we're just hanging out by the
4
bar.
o'clock counter was on.
Yeah.
That 4 count on that.
Count on that is right. All right. So people are coming in, and we're going to get started in just a moment. And we're going to have a good time. All right.
Good time.
A good time. All right. Good evening, everybody, wherever you may be. It's Thursday night, and at least here in sunny Los Angeles, it's 5 p.m. Pacific time. And that could only mean but one thing. It's time to head out to the yard. So welcome to everybody to the yard. And thanks for joining us. I think this is our 8th or 9th episode. And, you know, it's been a gas every single time we do this. My name is Richard Bronson. I am the founder and CEO of 70 Million Jobs, which is an employment platform for folks with records. And I'm also the founder and CEO of Commissary Club, which is a social network for folks with records. I am one of your hosts, and I am joined by 2 very dear friends and also teammates in our work. Number 1 is Seth Sundberg. Hello, Seth.
What's up, Richard? How are you?
Seth, the big man, as he is generally known in all different types of communities.
It does feel like you're about to announce my number too, like the big man in the middle.
Big man in the middle.
Yeah.
And I'm going to shoot a T-shirt to the crowd.
A T-shirt to the crowd.
Seth once played for the LA Lakers with a young Kobe Bryant. And we are joined by our other friend, who is a legend, no doubt. And he's a rap star. He's an entrepreneur of note. His name is Victor Lombard, but mostly people know him as Divine. Hey, D, how are you?
What's up, D?
Thank you for having me. The yard, everybody.
Thank you for having us, D. What is the yard for the benefit of folks who haven't been with us before? Let me explain for those who have been here. I don't know, go get a beer. The yard is part of Commissary Club, which I described before. We firmly believe that, you know, that there are we know that there are 70 million of us, people with records. That's 1 in 3 adults, which most people find is a mind-blowing statistic. And most people, unless, you know, you've done time or you're close to someone who have really very little insight, you know, into who these people are, and even less about what life is all about behind bars, you know, other than what they've seen on TV or in the movies. And our hope and our kind of the reason why we do this is that by the end of this episode or at a certain point, you'll come to understand that, we're just regular schmucks like anybody else. We're perfectly imperfect. We love our families. We worry about money. We try to be the best we can be. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes not so much. But what we want to do here in the yard is sort of, in a way, simulate the experiences that we all had when we were in prison, when we were let out into the yard. And you can get a feel of what it's really like and what goes on and what's said and what is felt. Again, we're just average people, but we're in very unaverage circumstances. In the yard, generically, people connect. People laugh, they argue a lot, they fight with one another, of course. They make things up, because when you're in prison, you could sort of be whoever you want to be. And sometimes there's a lot of sadness too. Typically you don't want to show your weakness, so you're not going to show the tears. Maybe you'll take a walk by yourself where you can sort of let it out. But whatever it is, it's always very human. And that's really what we're, eager to share with you. As a little housekeeping, if you have questions or comments, please utilize the chat mechanism, which already a number of people have done. And we will try to address as many of your thoughts and questions as we can. Our dear friend Adrian, who is also part of our team and really the brains behind all of this, she manages things behind the scenes. So if, for example, you'd like to join the conversation at a certain point, we typically will let in a couple of people halfway through. And if you want to be part of it, let her know, through the chat, excuse me, through the chat mechanism on the bottom of the screen. So without much ado, let me tell you who we've got tonight. We had a woman that we were really excited about having join us by the name of Carol Leonard. We will have her back, but unfortunately, Carol was not feeling well. And she asked everybody to please forgive her absence, but we'll have her back and I'm looking forward to it. But, we're not gonna let that get us down, because we have a great friend of ours who's joining us as well. First, we have a guy by the name of Aaron Kinzel. Is that right, Kinzel or Kinzel?
It don't matter, Richard. Either or. Tomato,
Okay.
tomato.
Okay, the Aaron part, did I get that right?
The Aaron part is correct.
Hey,
Absolutely.
50.
Good. Aaron is a very interesting guy. I think you'll all come to agree. Aaron's LinkedIn page has a big headline on the top, and it says, formerly incarcerated professor. Aaron is a lecturer at the University of Michigan, at a top university, and he lectures on criminology. And he also is the executive director of the Youth Justice Fund, which is an organization that helps returning citizens who were sentenced when they themselves were juveniles. Aaron, this is really interesting to me, Aaron describes his upbringing as being a family that had a lot of unlawfulness going on pretty much all around him. He ended up serving 10 years in prison himself, and he had his prison sentence begin at a very young age. So I think he's got a lot of interesting things he's ready to share with us. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us.
So fair.
Thank you for having me, Richard, and great to be here.
And incidentally, I asked him about the background. Some people have these phony computer-generated backgrounds. That, in fact, is where Aaron is standing, which is a prison.
Exactly. I'm sitting behind a Ireland prison right now.
Right. Aaron is on a He's on a madcap tour
World
of
tour.
Europe, visiting prisons, and right now he's in Ireland, and that's the prison behind him. Joining Aaron is a very good friend of ours who's been on the yard before. His name is Craig Cecil. Hey, Craig, how are you?
Hey,
I'm well. I'm well.
I know you look great. Craig, back in the day, Craig had a very successful business. He was a successful businessman. He was in the business of leasing tractor trailers, these big rigs. One of his customers was a very large distributor of marijuana. And back in 2002, federal agents discovered 1,500 pounds of pot in one of Craig's trucks.
Holy shit.
I'm not sure how it got there, but it was there. And Craig was implicated in that, and he was arrested. Apparently, all his co-defendants pled out with deals, leaving Craig really as the only guy, standing, sort of. And ultimately, he took the fall for that. And what a fall it was. He had no prior offenses. And however he was involved, it was with pot, a drug that I can walk down the street in LA and there are beautiful stores selling pot, like it's Neiman Marcus. But back when Craig was, involved, it wasn't so much that way. The judge threw the book at Craig, I think it's fair to say. For his involvement in marijuana, Craig received a life sentence. A life sentence. Sorry. A life sentence for dealing pot. Now, back last June in 2020, Craig, after serving 2 decades in prison, was temporarily released on a compassionate basis owing to the coronavirus and the risk of his incarceration that posed. He knew full well when they let him out that at any minute they could drag his sorry ass back to prison for the rest of his life, which, it's hard to imagine what life must be under, every time the phone rings. But when the phone did ring that fateful night, not too long ago, it was from the White House letting him know that no, he wouldn't be returning to prison, but in fact, he received a pardon. And Craig, since then, has been out. He's still under supervised release, but Craig, our dear friend, is not going back to prison. And we all couldn't be happier that he's back here with us. So Craig, my brother, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. This is a heck of a ride, just finding society and finding everybody that I remembered, back out in it.
Yeah.
Well, you found us, for better or for worse, and you stuck with us. Now, Craig, we've done this before, and so some of you who are in the audience are familiar with this, and some of you, I'm just going to ask you for your indulgence and your patience and your trust. I'm going to ask everybody first, all of our guests, my co-hosts, and everybody who's listening. First, everybody just take a deep breath. Just let it out. And just relax. Now, I'm going to ask everybody to shut their eyes. Just close your eyes, if you will. And I'm going to ask you to sort of let your mind just go wherever it's going to go. And I'm going to ask you, if you can, to imagine that, as sad as it is to say, you are currently incarcerated. You're in prison. Now, for some of us who have been in prison, perhaps it's not so hard to imagine. For those of you who haven't, let me fill in some of the blanks. If you're in prison, there's a good chance you're sharing a cell. They call those people your cellie, believe it or not. It's like a nice, sweet name. But that person inevitably is about 6'9". They're men or they're women. It doesn't really matter. And they weigh 300 pounds. And your cell is this tiny little space that has 3 cinder block walls and one wall where it's bars generally. And if you stood in the middle of it and put your arms out, you could probably touch either side of the walls. And you've been in that cell for God knows how long. And you're breathing the same air as your cellie day after day after day. Maybe you're lying back in your bunk and you're noticing, you know, through the bars, you're seeing guards carrying stretchers of fellow inmates, maybe friends of yours who have come down with the coronavirus. And they're sick, they're really sick and they're coughing. And there are people that they're kind of carting away, you know, that you don't want to really think about it, but maybe you're never going to see these people again. Some of them won't be coming back. But once a day, amidst all of this, amidst guards yelling at you, amidst waiting on lines for no reason at all, amidst the terrible food and the terrible medical care and the terrible, they have an announcement and they let you know it's your turn to go out into the yard. Here's your chance to get outside. Now, there are walls around, and depending on how the level of security in your prison, there may be lots of barbed wire and turrets and guards with guns and rifles standing there, or maybe it's just a wooden fence, or maybe whatever. But you're allowed to go out into the yard, which is typically a big open flat space. And when you go out into the yard, well, I've only seen men's prisons when I go out into the yard. You know, there are guys throwing around a football, and there are guys playing basketball, and then there are guys who are working out with the weights, they call that the weight pile. But on this particular day in the yard, you do what you did yesterday and what you'll do probably tomorrow, and that is you walk over to that same spot where your friends, your guys or your girls are day after day after day, where they hang out. And you can just sit there in their company. And if it's a nice day, you lean back and you let the warmth of the sun, you know, come down on you. And you're talking to people, and maybe you're sharing some bad news from home that's upsetting, and you're trying to sort of buck up the emotions of your friends. Or maybe someone's off on some, you know, ridiculous, you know, they're telling you about how they were big shots on the outside, or, you know, you're laughing, or you're talking about politics, or whatever the hell it is. You're just hanging out with your friends, and you're laughing, and you're yelling, and you're arguing, and you're just doing what friends do when they hang out. And what's so special about this is for these few moments, for the 45 minutes or the hour or whatever that they let you out there, you're no longer all wearing the same khakis. You're no longer getting yelled at by guards. You're no longer looking out through bars. But for these few moments, these precious moments, you're actually a human being. At least you could tell yourself that. At least you could remind yourself that you're a human being with family and friends on the outside that are desperately worried about you and thinking about you, and you're thinking about them. So you'll laugh a little bit, and you'll hold back the tears if something is sad, because on the yard, you don't want to show that sort of weakness. And maybe you'll just sort of walk away so you can let the tears out where no one will see you. But it's a few moments that you're actually a human being. That's what we're after here. That's what we're looking for in one another. And that's what we'd like to share with you tonight. So please, everybody, open your eyes. Thank you for indulging me. Thank you for going on this little trip with me. And let's get this started. This is not interviews, because the five of us are just on the yard and nobody interviews anybody on the yard, but just to get it going. I have to ask, Aaron, because it was so interesting to me. And I'm not really interested in right now what your life is today, but much more interested about what it was in prison. But still, I have to ask. Your headline on your LinkedIn, as I mentioned, says formerly incarcerated professor, not professor, comma, formerly incarcerated. It's almost like, it sounds to me, that there's a certain amount of pride in what you went through and how you came out of it. And that's kind of the way I feel. And I'm wondering, is that what motivated you to write what you wrote?
I don't know if it's pride, Richard, but I would say it's accountability and it's acceptance. So like I own that. I am like, you know, a convict, I'm a felon, whatever you want to like put that label on me. I think my identity is deeply impacted by my time in the penitentiary. So no matter what I do, I'll always be a convict first and a professor second, you know, a doctoral student, all those other taglines on LinkedIn. So that's a huge part of my identity. I think a big difference with the yard, thinking about how I grew up in prison as a kid, and I was locked up at the earliest 15, later in the penitentiary 18. In prison, you live in two places. You live in the past and the future. And out on the streets, we always live in the moment. So I think that's the two dramatic differences between the inside and the outside, is that, you know, when we're on the yard, we're constantly talking about reminiscing about the past and trying to create an ideal future for us, what we want to see out on the streets. But here out on the streets, most people don't give a shit about what happened yesterday or what they're going to do tomorrow. They're living in the moment. They're playing with their fucking phone. They're just living in the moment. They're absorbed in the moment. There's no, you know, a forethought of what, you know, they could be or what they do. So I think that's what really brought me a lot of success, was having those conversations on the yard with really good friends of mine that, you know, I talked about my dreams, you know, my demons, all this crazy stuff I went through as a kid. And to kind of realize that for me to move forward in life, I had to own that identity of who I was and what I did. And I think that's been my greatest success, is to kind of build off that and realize that, look, that's a part of who I am and I can never take that away.
And you call that a success?
I call it a success. I took some really crazy shit that happened to me as a kid. And then stuff that I did, you know, to get involved in the juvenile justice system and the adult criminal justice, which was extreme levels of violence. Like I started a shootout with the police when I was an 18-year-old kid. So that kind of tells you the wackiness that I was involved in. But that's how my family was. And I grew up around that. And that doesn't take away my accountability. It's just a way to kind of premise and understand that many people that are justice involved, particularly for violence, or even drug activity, like it's learned behavior. You grow up in you know, a certain area and that's all you see. You know, there is a choice, but like the easier choice is to get involved in the game, to be very frank.
All right, well, we're going to get into that. Craig, you spent a lot of time in prison where you perhaps were convinced that this is where you were going to spend the rest of your life. Did you think about the future, or did you just kind of write it off and concede that, you know, this is my future, it's my today, and there's nothing, you know, really to think about for the future?
Really, I fought for the future. And sometimes that future wasn't years out. Sometimes you fight for, you know, to get the food better in the prison. You fight to, you know, make it so that they would open the yard on all the days, not just the days when the cops felt like opening it. You got into a bunch of these fights, looking at the future, looking at what you can change. And even those small battles made it the passing at the time better. You were working towards a future where things were happening. And I even enjoyed, you know, talking to the guys and counseling a lot of the guys that were about to get out, which was kind of odd because a lot of them would say, you know, man, I'm sorry to talk to you about getting out in, you know, 4 months and all that, when I know you got a life sentence and, you know, they come with that. No, I'd like to hear people, you know, that are working on their happy ending, you know, that helps me, you know, want to work towards my own and, you know, want to look that I could have my own. And I did, you know, as you know, I kept fighting. You can't imagine how many times my fights in courts were turned down. I was turned down for clemency twice before this January. You know what I mean? But I kept fighting, and I inspired a lot of people to get behind me to fight just because they saw me fighting. They would line up. Sometimes some of the gangs would each send a few of their members to me with grievances to all file on the same issue. So now they see the whole compound file 120 grievances on one issue. And somebody snitched me out. They knew it was me behind it. But everybody was fighting together and we all got a victory out of it. So everybody in the whole population reveled in the victory we got when they added dessert back in. You know, when they, gave us our Kool-Aid back instead of just ice water. They seemed like really small fights, but they were big fights for us at
Yeah.
the time.
Yeah. Greg,
Give us butter for our bread.
Kool-Aid, man.
how much of that is ingrained in like just keeping hope right on, inside, and every victory, no matter how small, even if it's just getting through the day, right, keeps you moving, right? I mean, I can't even imagine like doing an elbow, right? What there's got to be days that you're just like, man, this is bullshit, right? Like this is whatever. And then, something would happen. You're like, okay, did you just search for that hope and try to hold on to it?
You do. What I would do is, especially when you serve a really long sentence and you're given a really long sentence, your hope is that the direct appeal is going to cure this and you're going to be going home soon.
Yeah.
Well, sure as shit that fails,
So
Then there's a post-conviction relief.
So did you go through? I had certainly compared to you, I had a short sentence, and for me, my attitude was, all right, this is terrible, but it has a beginning and has an end. Whereas I'm sure there were moments where while you tried to remain positive and hopeful, that something like what happened would happen. How I just always thought, like, how can you really just sit there knowing that the rest of my life might be spent in this miserable circumstance? Like, how did you just keep going?
You get up and say, I'm going to make it worthwhile. If not for me, for everybody else. Like I say, you work to make your future, even if your future's in the prison. And, you work to make those changes. You work to help those other guys walk out the door.
Oh,
so you still move forward in prison. You don't stop living in prison. You just, you make the best of it. You still move forward. You still accomplish things.
When you were early in your bid, did you? When I was down, I went through a transition facility and met a guy that. He had done 13 years and he gave back his life. He had just given his life sentence back, and that's kind of where I met him. But he was saying that in the first 2 years that he was down, he's like, man, I never got out of bed. He's like, what the fuck are they going to do to me? You know what I mean? I'm here forever. Like,
yeah. How did it take you an adjustment to have the attitude that you ultimately had, Craig?
No, really, from the beginning, I was just determined that this life wasn't gonna stick. One way or another, I was gonna walk out the front gate. I was just determined from the day I got that sentence that it was gonna change, and I kept that determination. And as you know, I luckily, it did change. And I think I mentioned to you earlier about a friend of mine that I hung around with in the prison since 2011. He had gotten a marijuana charge in 1994. He was sentenced to 30 years. Being a new prisoner and a kind of a young guy, he came in going crazy and all that. So really, he lost his first 10 years a good time. Making hooch, getting at fights, doing all the things that a new young guy does. I was already in my 40s when I went in. But that guy, him and I got to be good friends. And he went through those same roller coasters of denied. And somebody talked him into the middle of February to putting in a compassionate release filing because he had about a year and a half to do on his sentence left. But they said, even when you only have that much left, put in this compassionate release thing. Some of these people are getting relief in light of the COVID. Sure enough, last Friday, the court granted it.
Wow.
But the more amazing part is 2 weeks before, on the phone, his daughter had told him that she had had a dream, that he came knocking on her front door and told her that the prison had let him out early. So he kept that, there was really nobody that knew. Me and a couple of advocates knew that he was going to get out. And he kept that under his hat. And sure enough, he left the prison at 5 o'clock on Monday. And by 6:30 on Monday, he had gotten into his daughter's house and sat down in the living room and was waiting for her to come home.
That's amazing.
Yes.
So, Aaron, you mentioned that at age 50, well, let me just back up. And if you don't want to talk about this, well, you better. You mentioned that you had a family life, that it was not a Norman Rockwell childhood for you, right? Is that fair?
That's kind of underplaying it a little bit, but sure, go ahead.
What was it like? You know, what
Um,
was the circumstances?
I mean, like briefly, like it's hell on wheels. And just before I answer that, I want to say a really quick point about what something Craig said. Like for the long timers and the lifers, I think there was a really interesting philosophical standpoint that was played out in the Shawshank Redemption, where Red and Andy are talking about this moment to where Red is saying like hope is a dangerous thing. And Andy's like, hope is the only fucking thing you got.
Yeah.
You know, about getting out. So I think that's a really interesting point to where, like I was saying before, the future context. But some people, you know, get in that mindset like I'm never going to leave, but I'm going to build a future here in prison for myself, while others really kind of focus on the, you know, I'm going to eventually get out even if I do have life. So I think that's an interesting parallel between the two.
It's an amazing sentence that you even said. I'm going to build a future here in prison.
Yeah.
That's even did you ever feel that way, D? That like, you know, you like I can make something happen. Well, you did. You got out. You know, I mean, you used your time.
I mean, with or without life, when you're doing an Olympic sentence, you just look at it like, yo, you have to build a life here. You just have to, and that the reality sets in, and you just got to do it. If you don't, and you keep your mind on the outside, as we say, your mind's in a free world, but your body's incarcerated.
Mm-hmm.
The whole thing is that you got to, you know what I'm saying? You got to think about like, I got time to do, man. You gotta function accordingly, man. To keep your sanity.
It's amazing.
Survival.
So what was it like when you were 13, 14, 12, Aaron, that was so crazy about your home life?
I think the worst part was when I was much younger. Like when I was 5 or 6, I seen all kinds of violence in my community. I grew up in the projects of Toledo, Ohio. So I went from the violence of the inner city into rural white America, which a lot of people don't really understand the violence that is out in the middle of nowhere with crazy hillbillies that have millions of guns and there's no cops anywhere to like really control anything that's going on. I've seen people murdered in the projects, but I've seen people murdered in very grotesque ways and things that I can't even talk about here in the middle of nowhere in a pig field. So like, and at the age of 8, my stepfather tried to murder me. I watched him beat my mother. He's beat me. He shot at me with a .357 Magnum. So this violence is just constant in my life. But like with a lot of the people that I know that went in for violent offenses, and again, this doesn't excuse it, we were exposed to violence at a young age. So all that trauma that I faced as a child helped me grow in a way that in order for me to survive, I had to become aggressive, assertive, and violent, or I would be dead right now.
You adapted, you adapted to circumstances.
Absolutely. But the thing that I feel bad for, in all honesty, is that was a huge part, my environmental factor, you know, my nurturing the environment, but also nature inherently. As I started to like be subjected to violence, and then as a teenager, Richard, like 12, 13, I started to become violent more. So I did this shift and I felt bad for it. And I knew some of the stuff I was doing was wrong. And yet I still had this rational choice or will that I said, you know, even though I know what I'm doing is wrong, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to let anybody fuck with me ever.
But in fact, at that age, with the trauma you went through, there was an illusion of free will. You know, I mean, it's pretty overwhelming to be that young, to go through that, and then to say, well, you know better, you know, and you're responsible. I mean,
right. I don't know. I disagree. I mean, I think you're right, but also I push back because like, again, I think it's really 50-50. It's half I was groomed that way and I became that because of my environment, but the other half is that, you know, I still made choices. No one put a gun in my hand as a kid, and no one said, Aaron, go shoot at the police.
Yeah. So Aaron, that's a great point. When you know, and when you're down, like you make another choice, right? Like to get to where you are now, right? Because you could continue, you could well just continue that path and continue that violent streak once you get out and go into that. I mean, at what point did you make that choice to go, all right, you know, fuck this, like
Yeah.
I mean, you work on some stuff, or was it conscious? Was it one day? Was it over a period of time? Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think it's like an epiphany moment. I think that's what we see in the movies where everybody just has an aha moment. They wake up and they've been saved, or they change their mindset. I don't think that's really true. I think it's very incremental. I mean, that's my experience, and many other people I've worked with, it's very incremental, that change. I think age is a huge factor. So kind of like Craig said, these young kids, me going in at 18, I was a violent psychopath. I don't know how else to put it. I would be on the yard, physically violent with staff, other prisoners. But then the unique piece was guys like Craig that were doing life. So I got the young kids over here saying, Aaron, let's go smash this dude. And then I got the older guys over here saying, Aaron, you're a smart kid. You need to smarten the fuck up. You're never going to get out of here. So I had these two dualities, like trying to push me in.
So let's get into that. You're 15 and you got locked up for the first time, right? Okay. Were you conscious of, okay, I'm here. I better, this is a violent environment and I better be assertive. I'm not going to take shit from anybody. Did you get in a fight your first day? What was it like to be 15 years old locked up?
So the first day I was locked up at 15, the night before I beat the shit out of 2 police officers at a basketball game just because they put their hands on me and said I smell like weed. So that was me as a kid. Some man comes at me aggressively. It doesn't matter if they're a cop, a judge, or whoever, I respond with violence. So that's internal and external. So I get put in solitary confinement. My first few days in the juvenile justice system, I didn't have any interaction with anybody. They put me in solitary. I had no interaction with anyone for a few days.
I have to interject, and this is probably things you talk about, academically, but the United States is the only country that puts juveniles into solitary
in segregation. Yes, absolutely.
And
it's hell on earth. It's the worst possible place. It's horrible for adults, but to put a child that's brain is still developing in that type of environment, I guarantee you that's part of the reason why I became more violent later on. Because it inhibits cognitive functionality, it creates anxiety, it creates paranoia, psychosis, hallucinations.
Did you feel that all of that coming on to you? Did you experience it, in fact?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I used to do acid a lot and mushrooms when I was a kid, and to be very honest, in other countries where it's legal and other places I've recreationally done stuff like that, I actually find it, when it's done medicinally, it's very interesting and useful, but as a kid, it certainly wasn't the case. But I've had more intense hallucinogenic experiences as a teenager in solitary confinement than I have on like 5 or 6 hits of acid or eating a handful of mushrooms. Wow. And not a good trip, like I was having a great time and was loving the colors and smelling the music and all that shit, but very intense, nightmarish, demonic, weird shit, anxiety, thinking you're having a heart attack and dying. Because like there's days I went without food. Like you get on this thing called Food Loaf, which I'm sure some of you guys have heard of. Everyone knows what Food Loaf is, has been in prison, or this brown bag thing, and they turn your water off because someone flooded your cell. Like there was points I literally went 2 or 3 days without eating. Like, I mean, that induces its own type of like hallucinogenic experience on top of the chaos that is, this isolated penitentiary within.
And how long were you in the shoe for? Yeah.
So in the beginning, as a 15-year-old, it was just a week or two. Later on in life, when I was 18, when I got locked up in the county jail for my case with the violence with law enforcement, I spent a year and a half in the county and probably close to a year of that time in segregation. Yeah. Because I would constantly fight with the guards. Everybody was testing me, and I would just always respond with violence. Later on in prison, I think the longest stint I did was probably 9 or 10 months. And then later on, a few months here or there. So really long periods of time, but I have friends that have done way more, honestly, Seth, like that have done 5, 10, 20 years in seg straight, which is just, I can't even describe that, it's just beyond torture.
I did 4 months in the shoe. And I was like,
that's hard. That's
I'm not going to be a bad boy anymore, mama. Trust me.
So you think it broke you? Like, do you think that's where you kind of like, was it? I had made a decision that I was going to get out, and that was
uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I would say Kimberly in our audience mentions, I hope you don't mind that I use your name, Kimberly, but her daughter at age 15 did 4 months of solitary. So
Yes,
it's
exactly.
not just, it's
Yeah.
not a rarity. It happens all
No,
the
no, it's
time.
very common, and it's horrific, Richard.
I'll tell you this.
Of
So
all the things that we can do with justice reform nationally in this country, I think the segregation and solitary confinement of juveniles is the worst thing that we're doing.
Were you in state or federal, Aaron?
I was in state facilities, but my case it was actually in one of the whitest places on earth, out in Maine, in New England. Nobody knows where the hell that is unless you've seen The Shawshank Redemption or read another Stephen King novel. But when I got into the shootout with law enforcement, they were going to take me federal. And I actually had a chance to get some really good guidelines, but as a kid, I really wasn't savvy to where, the point system and all that.
Right, right.
I had my attorney advocate for me because it was state troopers to put it as a state case, and I ended up getting screwed. If I would have went to the feds, I think with my guidelines, I would have got 7 years. I ended up getting 19 years, all but 11 years straight, so a split sentence.
Wow, you served 11 total?
I'm sorry, Dick.
You served 11 total, Aaron?
I did almost 10 straight because Maine was one of the few states that had good time. So we did 85% of our time with truth and sentencing.
It's like
I lost a lot of good time all the time in and out of SEG, but I still got a chunk knocked off, so I didn't have to serve that full 11. And what was unique about Maine is they had a mandatory parole system, which I loved. I really hated the whole system, but what they did really right there is that once you hit your minimum, you were automatically released. There was no parole board. What Michigan does, where I live now, it's horrific. Like, they have these huge tail end sentences. So you might have a 10 to 50. Once you're at your min at 10, they're not letting you out. They often hold people till their 30th or 40th year before they show interest in parole, which is just bullshit.
Right. Yeah. That's
somebody asked, what's the difference between solitary and segregation? And
tomato, the
same thing.
Right. I was gonna say it's the same thing. Yeah.
It's putting someone all alone. 23 hours a day, so that all of a sudden there are little creepy crawlies that are appearing in the corner of your mind and all kinds of weird shit.
Sudoku saved me in the shoe. I just had
Sudoku.
Mine was chess, Seth. I would play with my celly next to me through the vent. We would do chess.
So you didn't have to go through that. You stayed out of trouble, basically, didn't you, Craig?
Oh yeah, I did plenty of time in the shoe.
Oh, you did? Why? What got you there?
Usually because I was leading something that the administration didn't like. So, leading strikes to get, like one at the U.S. Penitentiary at Big Sandy, they didn't allow us to have legal calls during the weekdays. So a bunch of us started filing stuff, started acting up, and they found me to be the leader, and they sent me in the shoe for about 6
leadership
months.
role.
Craig, it sounds like you got a big career, a big future in politics, man. Like I see it in your future.
Run for office, man.
There's that. One of the things that I think TV and movies gets right is they have the image of the warden sort of being this imperial emperor of their domain, and they are in complete and total control of this environment. And typically prisons, as opposed to jails, prisons are sort of in the middle of nowhere, generally, where they can have big open field, land really cheap.
Antelope capital of the world.
Yeah, and it's a big part of the economy of this little town, and they're the largest employers of the town. And the warden really is utterly, it's in control, answerable to nobody, in fact.
That's
and
true.
Certainly throwing Craig's ass in prison, in solitary, because he, made a trouble about something. Because they're desperately afraid is that people are going to complain, and it's going to get them in trouble with their boss, or that if someone has some connections, it becomes political or whatever. But if you're on the warden's bad side, or even a guard's bad, I got on a guard's bad side, and it was just the worst thing I could possibly go through.
Diesel therapy.
And
that's right.
These people, they have very little going on in their life other than their ability to make you miserable.
Oh, you mean to fuck with you?
To fuck with you, and they take full advantage of.
Oh, they do.
They got to keep from being bored too.
They love it.
In other words, I should have been more compassionate towards this guy for the way he treated me, is what you
Oh,
said.
you mean more respectful?
Well, yeah, that definitely would have helped too. But
You
it's
know, Richard, that makes me think like, so we often hear the criminal justice system is broken.
Yeah.
And I often stand up and do public speaking before COVID and say like, you know, that's actually total bullshit. Prisons are actually, in the criminal justice system as a whole, is the greatest successful American business experiment in our entire history.
Absolutely.
They're doing exactly
Very
what
successful.
they're designed to do. Yes, they are set up as systems of control.
Yeah.
They're a paramilitary complex, like you talked about the warden and these
Oh,
lieutenants.
I love it. I love it, Aaron. Speak on it.
Yeah, they're all just, you know, a mechanism to control, surveil, and you know, demolish certain communities.
Yes,
I mean, let's be
yes,
real. That's
yes.
what it's all about. It's
All
not
right.
it's not a broken
Speaking of that, hold on, hold on.
It's
So
designed
speaking
very
of that,
well, actually.
How much of prison did you guys see in the last year with what came down with Corona restrictions and all the things? And I was like, it was like the same. I'm like, oh, this is the same thing they do in prison, and this is the same thing they do in prison. Like,
Okay, I don't think
No,
you
it's
guys.
exactly,
In
it's
other
exactly
words,
the same thing.
they locked us down,
Yeah.
Yes.
and you couldn't do this, you couldn't do that, and they called it coronavirus. But that was a good day in prison.
exactly.
Absolutely.
And it was like, this is the best prison I've ever been in.
I know.
Right.
All right, so let me ask you guys to change the subject a little bit here. Aaron and Craig, you're two white guys, I've noticed. Were you faced with, you know, racial things, gang things when you came to prison that you had to deal with, either, Aaron, when you were very young at 15 or 17 when you were transferred? You know, was that part of your reality? And, you know, what was that like?
So for me, my father was Hispanic. Most people don't know that, but when I joke, like when I went to Maine, it was uber white. So a lot of the, you know, the prisoners look like me. But actually, ironically, like for the small population of racial minorities that were African Americans and a pretty large indigenous population, I used to kick it with a lot of them, to be frank. So like some of my best friends were natives. So where I was unique. It was a maximum security facility, but there was really no gang activity because there wasn't enough of a huge racial divide that really necessitated that. There were certainly cliques, but there was not this racial divide. And I went in 97, so that was the height of mass incarceration under the Clinton administration, shortly after the Omnibus Crime Bill in 94. But then, like towards the end of my sentence, they created a lot of railways that were going up into Maine from Boston and other places down in New Hampshire that created this huge influx of racial minorities. And then, as I was starting to there started to become these racial tensions.
Really?
And it was just really interesting for me because even though a lot of my family are racist hillbillies that I hate, I've never been racist my whole life. In fact, most of my friends are people of color. And I just find that I think the deeper connection for me is that, you know, a lot of them often have come from these marginalized communities, and I grew up in the project. So I think I identify more with that, even though I kind of like being out in the country. I don't like a lot of these, you know, uber racist assholes sometimes that live out there, but I like my separation from society. I just don't like living in the city because there's a million people there.
Okay. What about you, Craig? You know, you came in with a life sentence, which generally in prison affords you a high level of respect. You know, and people,
Fortunately, yeah.
right? But I don't remember us talking about this. Did you have to address any of these kind of situations?
Well, and yes, but coming into the system with the life sentence, they put you in a joint where most of the people have a life sentence.
Right.
I started out in USP Atlanta, and I made them mad pretty fast. And you've heard about the statement that they put you on the first thing smoking. I only lasted 2 weeks in Atlanta, and they put me on a bus to Big Sandy, Kentucky, in the middle of nowhere.
Diesel therapy for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
I was in USP Atlanta too.
okay. And well, at Big Sandy, the population was almost all black. Out of 1,500 people on the compound, we never had 200 white guys.
Wow.
And
Was that frightening to you initially?
It was overwhelming because over 800 of them were DC inmates, so that they all had kind of that background of being from the same place, you know.
DC dudes, man. Oh man.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
This was
man.
after they had closed down Lorton, which was the prison for DC.
Yo,
And,
man.
and we had all their lifers. And but so there's rules in the prison, as we all learned. You have
Like
to get
what?
in the white line to go get your food, not the black line. In front of the TV, you have to go sit in front of the white TV, not the
All right,
black
so hold
TV,
on
or
a
at the
second.
black table. You
Good
Let
know?
me
point
ask
about the TVs. I know the TV stuff. The line, food line, not.
Okay, so let me ask you about the food line that you're asking about. Who oversaw that, and how did you first learn of it? Did you just notice it, or did someone clue you in early?
Formal rules, yeah.
Well, be honest, that Big Sandy, I was amongst the first 21 people that opened the prison, and I was really new and green the prison. 3 of the 21 they opened the prison with already had bodies in the BOP. They had already killed other prisoners.
Wow, was
So
that
this
a
is
pen?
the kind of group I went in with.
And that was a pen, Craig?
Yes,
Okay.
and a level 6 pen, and so they got to teach me the rules right off. I got mentored essentially right off by then. But after a while, you kind of make your own way. I wasn't one to ride in the white car. I wasn't, you know. Of course, I would sit at the white tables and all that because you don't dare otherwise. But I remember back then on Pork Chop Day, I would go get in the black line for. I would get in the black line for food. And,
Pork chop.
the only white guy in the whole black line for food, because all the it seemed like it was a big
I
big
can't take
matter
it.
of pride that a black said, "Oh, I never eat pork."
Swine.
So there's me with my tray out. You know, yes, it cost me my dessert. It would cost a couple other good things on the
I love
tray.
it. Oh
I'd
man.
walk away from the food line with about a dozen pork chops.
Yo.
And boy, were they good.
And the guys at the white table didn't complain about me going through the black line. I still sat at the white table with a
Grab as
dozen
much
pork
pork
chops.
chops as you can.
Greg, let me ask you something. So
Oh man.
you're free now, and you mentioned about getting a mentor when you first got in and getting mentored and schooled on what's legit and what's not legit, right? Like, it seems like that's a regular thing that happens to everybody. Happens, I got it too, everybody. But now that you're out, is there anybody that's like you can go, hey man, here's the mentor. I'm gonna take you under my wing. This is how life goes out, outside after 20 years.
Well, to be honest, I told you about the guy that just got out of prison on Monday.
Yeah.
And as you know, people that serve a long time, I mentioned how, all these different appeals and all that fail. An inmate won't, a long-termer doesn't believe anything. The law comes out that's guaranteed to get him out of prison.
Right.
After you've become jaded for a few years, I'll see it to believe it.
Right.
I was told by several people that were positive that Trump had already signed my commutation. But my answer to all of them was the same: as I'll believe it as soon as it's in my hand.
Right, for real. So they call my name and say, pack up, I'll believe it then.
But my friend that just got out of prison on Monday, his family's telling him things, and naturally he doesn't trust anything after all those years in prison and all that. So he's leaning on me now for what actually is true of what his family's telling him.
So Aaron, was it tough for you? And we're jumping sort of ahead of my agenda here, but you're bringing up, a point, Craig, of release and adjustment.
Yeah.
Was it hard for you to trust? And what else was hard for you when you got out of prison?
I think that's the most unspoken about aspect of the prison experience, Richard, is that, there's huge levels of trauma. Like, obviously, everybody knows prison's hard. It's not easy. And the way I grew up and a lot of other people grew up on the streets wasn't easy either. But coming home, honestly, I think in many ways, it's this decompression phase that it's like you're sent to not even China, it's the moon. You're in a whole new world, particularly for those of us that were, in for a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades. You're so far removed from society and institutionalized. It's super bad.
What does institutionalized mean? What does it mean when an inmate is shot?
is shot. So, well, the institutionalization is just like this idea. It's an academic thing, but people
He's
use it.
shot.
The media is that you're fixated to that like prison experience. Like everything is based on this consciousness connected to the yard, to the block, to your interaction with other
Your routine.
It's deprogramming.
Yes, exactly. You're programmed in a certain way. And what happens when people come home is there's no debrief. Like we have our best.
Exactly.
There's no debrief. When they come back from war, and in some ways in the prison system can be a war like environment. So
yeah.
And we're also programmed as robots, particularly as men, to be these hyper masculine, aggressive assholes. So then we come home and try to have interactions with females, and we're like, I want to fuck this bitch, and I want to do this, that, and we're not treating women with respect.
Good point, Aaron.
We don't know how to have a social relationship, or how to like talk to our children if we have them, or like for me, I got married and I couldn't talk to my wife, man. Like I had this huge disconnect because like my wife would not attack me, but like come up me with problems and like get in my face. And to me, I see that as an attack. There's this proximity thing. And I'm like, whoa, you got to back the fuck up and not talk to me like that. And I didn't know how to tell her like how I was feeling.
And she's a woman who hung in there with you and sacrificed.
She did for years until I got my divorce. But, that was, I have a beautiful baby girl out of it, which I learned a lot from too. And I think that was like 5 or 6 years ago. So like initially the trauma stuff was huge, and I didn't understand what was wrong with me when I come home. Now as an academic and someone that works heavily in reentry, and I work with juvenile lifers, meaning kids that went in that picked up the life sentence like Craig, but they went at 15, 16 years old. And their disconnect is huge, but I see it. So I watch them come out, I take them to the store, and they're like in shock. They're like almost want to grab my hand and be like, oh my God, I'm in mire.
Everything puts them
everything
in
is like overwhelming, and there's this huge oversense color, sounds, proximity, all these things are shocking to them, and they're getting anxious and they don't know why the hell they are. And I explain to them like, look, this is okay, this is normal, because you've been institutionalized. You're so used to that environment, you're not used to like coming out of that water.
So I was just going to mention a question we have here from James. He asks, are there, mental health services available inside of a prison?
This is where I fall over and laugh, right?
If you take a drug program, maybe.
Yeah.
Why do you laugh?
I mean, there are some programs, but let's be honest, like the largest mental health provider in the United States, you know where it is? Cook County Jail.
Is it? Where?
Cook County Jail. Cook County Jail.
Yeah.
Like, and if you look at the whole U.S. system, like we're the prison population is the only one guaranteed medical coverage. But what type of coverage they get, we all know that's not very great. And mental health is just
So did you avail yourself of it in prison?
Did I ever avail myself of any mental health services?
Yes.
I tried it at a couple points, like particularly when I was in segregation. There was this young Asian guy that would come in there and teach us mindfulness, and I was like all about getting out of my cell, even though I would get 5-point shackles on me to sit there and do some Buddha stuff that I honestly thought was whack at the time. But then I was like, holy shit, I love this stuff. And it was very helpful for me to kind of center my body, to meditate and do yoga and all this stuff. But like, that's not something that's like really normal.
In my prison, they gave out Prozac like candy. They distribute Prozac to everybody. It was like,
in segregation, that's the default like mental health spot.
What about you, Craig? Did you ever see a shrink in prison?
No, I didn't. The closest I came is I was one of the suicide watch companions.
Oh yeah.
Where people they would lock them in a room with a glass door on it, and you watch to make sure they didn't kill themselves. Yeah.
I have a question
That's
for
an
Aaron.
upbeat job.
Well, Aaron, to add on to what you were saying earlier, like, did you ever feel yourself when you came home sensitive or hypersensitive to like disrespect?
Oh,
someone
absolutely.
Spoke to
That's
you
a
wrong.
great question,
like,
Dick.
I felt like, I'll be honest with you, I went through that. Like people talking to you, like, yo, who you talking to? Like, are you out your mind? You crazy? Like, I would just react just like I was still in prison. Because people disrespect you with the smallest things that is.
You got to smack them in the face.
But in prison,
you can't keep,
we just can't have it. We just can't have it.
And Divine, that's like one of the biggest things too that's connected to like a lot of the trauma therapy work I do with my reentry
Exactly.
program is that, you know, I get with a lot of these hyper masculine men and tell them, say, look, I'm still a big dude. I'm 6 foot, 250 pounds, mean asshole. But like
Right.
I've learned to control that. And it's taken
Right.
me 13 years to get to that point. But like a lot of them are, like you said, they come home, they've got that penitentiary mentality. They're puffed up, they're looking around them all the time, don't bump into me. So it takes like my guess is this from an academic piece is that for every year you do inside, you need that many years to decompress out on the streets. And
Interesting.
so like the
certainly
10 years
not
I
given
did
that.
inside, honestly, the last 3 years or so, I've really started to feel kind of like semi-normal. I don't think it ever goes away, but like I felt a lot better now today. Like I have less nightmares and thoughts about prison as I did when that first year out. I was thinking about the police chasing me, drug dealers, rivals kicking in my family's door, going back in the block. All these different violent things were constantly in my consciousness.
It took me 10 years to stop dreaming about prison related stuff.
Wow.
Crazy. How long have you been out, Aaron?
So a little more than 13 years now. This March will be 14.
Great.
And I think that's something you wanted me to talk about, Richard. I'll bring that up real quick. So March 3rd, I have a very special day. So, and I'm not proud of this by any means, but like, you know, I had a violent confrontation with law enforcement involving a firearm. Okay. And as we all know, felons are not allowed to have guns. Okay. There's a unique thing here in Michigan where after so many years after being off of paper or just released without parole, you can put in for the circuit court to have your gun rights restored. So I've got a hearing this Wednesday coming up, which I'm super excited about, not because I want to go out and shoot people again, but because I think as an American that, you know, I have a right. Why the hell should I be in a second class status where everybody else in the world, particularly in Michigan, there's probably 1 billion guns. Why can't I have a gun? Why can't I go and protect myself and get a registered firearm? You know, I'm a professor, director, all this other stuff, but it's always that felon. That's that first prefix for me. So I think I have a really interesting opportunity to make that go away to where, you know, I can legally own a firearm and not have to worry about, you know, the police kicking my door in and taking me.
That's great, man. I'm giving you good vibes on that for sure. That's a big step, and that's.
How many of us would like to have a gun if we had the opportunity to have one? Not you, Craig? Maybe.
Maybe.
I definitely. I'm actually trying to get my rights back right now as we speak.
Trying to do a pardon.
Okay. Awesome.
I don't even believe in guns, but I just feel like
I believe in the Second Amendment.
The same here. I mean, I think it's a choice. It's not even a choice. I think it's a right that's drawn out for us.
Yeah, I believe.
My greatest fear is I'd have to use it. You know, and would I pull the trigger? You know, I pray that I would never have to be in that situation. You know,
but what if you were? I mean, like, think about your family, Richard. If you or your family was in a dire situation and where you had the choice between saving your life or theirs and harming someone.
I mean, I hear you, and I raised my hand, but you know, we can't ignore the fact that people who are most adamant about the Second Amendment and having guns are not really just benignly want to protect themselves. They show up at the U.S. Capitol and they break down walls. Yeah. And they conspire to kidnap your governor because they're crazy motherfuckers.
Absolutely. Yeah, they excessively believe in the Second Amendment.
Well, to an absurd level, as far as I can tell. All of a sudden, they're constitutional scholars.
They are, and they're not at all.
Fucking amendment.
Dumb hillbillies. I'll say this, Richard. Like, if anybody reads the Second Amendment, it says very clearly a well-regulated militia. So, you know, I'm not hitting on the militia point. Well-regulated. So that means I think, and I agree with, we should be able to have firearms, but nobody should be carrying around a fucking 50 caliber sniper rifle.
No idiots allowed.
In a state capitol. That's just ridiculous.
Or in a saloon.
There's no need for stuff like that. And do you need 10,000 rounds of ammunition in one spot? No.
Yeah,
so I think there are like regulations that we can put in place that are you know, effective and
all right. So if I'm watching this, I'm looking at my friend Craig, and Craig, among the 5 of us, you are the calmest, the easiest to smile and laugh. you're serene, you're pacific, and yet you're the guy who's done the most time and who lived under the most pressure about seeing the rest of their life, being spent that
Absolutely.
way. How do you do that? I mean, what's with you, man? I mean, I don't even trust you for this.
Well, if there's one thing you learn in prison, it's patience.
How to chill.
Because
Oh,
if you're
man.
waiting for a court to do something on a timely basis, it just doesn't happen.
Never happens.
If you're waiting for supper to be at the right time, it doesn't
Yeah.
happen.
Right.
You just learn that,
But you're
you
not
learn to have
you're not
that
bitter,
patience.
Craig. You're not bitter. You didn't feel like you got fucked over.
I got fucked over by people, but not the system, is my way of looking at it. I think the system can and should work, but it has no oversight. There's too many people that just don't follow the system. Wardens that just don't serve the right food. Prosecutors that don't give you the discovery in your case so you know that there's more evidence to clear you than there is to convict you.
So is that human error? I mean, is that purposely? Is that
Too
purposely
often,
human error?
like I say, those people do it deliberately. But a lot of that's because there's no oversight on them. Who really goes through and checks to make sure a prosecutor did his job correctly?
Oh, good
Even
point.
make sure a defense lawyer did his job correctly.
Good point.
That's where our failure is. The system isn't the failure. The people are. And the fact that the people aren't, exposed to any oversight. How many inspectors did you see come into prison while you were there?
Never.
You've seen administrators from other prisons come. Those aren't inspectors. Those are buddies.
So,
I think the system.
so I'm going to ask all four of you guys the same question, and try to answer this without really giving it too much thought, which is how I've gone through my life, by the way. What I'd like to know is, what do the movies and TV have totally wrong regarding prison and incarceration? What do they get wrong? Aaron.
I think the biggest misconception is the oversaturation of violence and sexual assault in penitentiaries. I think that's sensationalized, and does it happen? We all know it happens. Does it happen every 5 seconds? And when the little fish comes in, do all the piranhas come and get him? No.
That's not like Oz, that TV show.
It is not like, oh my God, Oz is entertaining, but total bullshit.
Right.
So Orange is the New Black.
Okay, that would have been my answer too. Seth.
But I will say this really quick. The Shawshank Redemption, in my opinion, is probably the most accurate portrayal of penitentiary life. I think a lot of that is really realistic in that, and a lot of the lifestyles and the connections with the corruptness of the system and the livelihood of the individual.
Is that the best prison movie ever made?
I think a lot of people think that.
Is it the realest or is it?
I think it's the realest, maybe the best. I'd say both.
I think it's the best. Seth, what do they have wrong in prison?
No, it's the same. I mean, I totally agree that I spent a year in county jail and learned a lot in county and all that. And then, I was like, oh, when I got sentenced, you go to big boy prison, and I thought, oh shit, here we go. Like I thought, and I found out county jail was 10 times worse than prison ever was. And I saw the first day I saw what I thought was a woman walk through the line, like, oh, this is a co-ed prison. Like, this is no big deal.
A woman.
There was no woman. Do you agree with Aaron? The level of violence and sexual violence is overblown because it sells.
Yes, I do agree with him. But my answer, because he took that one from me, he spoke first. I'm gonna say that people who incarcerate are negative and hopeless. When really in prison, we are very positive and hopeful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What do you think, Craig?
I agree that it's overblown as far as the rapes and sexual assaults and all that, because that's all they have to go on, I guess, to talk about. But really what they're leaving out is a lot of the hopelessness and the waste of the people, that they don't really show how people aren't moving forward in there. A few that are, taking some classes or reading their books and all that. But so many of them, they play poker all day.
Yeah. What do you make of the fact we work, Seth, Divine, and I work with, and you guys too, in your work, a lot of people who are reentering, returning citizens. And we're constantly amazed how almost every one of these men and women want to not like forget about the past. They don't want to get like some job, they want to sort of give back to the community. They want to do a nonprofit. They want to help one another. Why is that? I mean, if these are violent people and awful people, and I don't know what you're doing there, but it's kind of freaking me out, Aaron, with your hands.
Yeah, I'm typing. Someone's texting me. Can I answer that real quick? So, like,
if you put your hands down, then the answer would be yes.
This is freaking out. Okay.
Yeah.
I think this misperception of people inside is that, like Divine kind of touched on this. There's a lot of good people in there that did just bad things. We made mistakes, and people age out of crime. That's a criminological concept that's been proven
out of crime. You don't see 60-year-olds slinging drugs,
slinging dope, punching someone in the face, shooting at the police. It just doesn't happen.
I think a lot of crime that's committed is circumstantial, right? It's environment you grew up in, the peer pressure. Like, there's so many different things. Yeah. It's not like, oh, I'm just waking up in the morning, I'm a diabolical criminal.
Yeah. So
I'm a super predator. I want to just go out and just commit crimes.
Exactly. And I think that's the heart of, the era of mass incarceration that we're in right now. So if you go back in time to the early 70s, we had 200,000 or 300,000 people incarcerated nationwide.
Now we have 2.5 million.
Yeah. And so like now has everybody lost their shit and become crazy? No. There's been very specific policies, redlining districts,
yes,
in access of jobs,
yes,
racial, discrimination, economic disparity. All these different things have been very specifically created artificially by the government, which creates illicit economies. So the government in reality is responsible for 80 to 90% of the crime rate.
Agreed. And that's the point I was getting to.
Yeah. All right. This has been amazing. All of you guys. At this point, normally I take like 2 minutes and something I call my rant. For those of you who know me well, I am endlessly annoyed by things. To me, anywhere I look, there's something that just sort of pisses me off, and I feel like I'm the only sane person in an insane world, which probably makes me totally insane. But I find that being able to share this sort of gets me through my day. So perhaps you'll kind of dig where I'm coming from, or perhaps you'll just put up with it. Either way, I appreciate it. Why should I be the only one who's miserable, really? Normally I point out things that I think are wrong or horrible in the system, but this week something actually good happened. This week, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker signed a bill that made it in Illinois the first state in the country to abolish cash bail. Cash bail payments for jail release for people who've been arrested and who are awaiting their case to be heard. This is something that a lot of people are not really all that familiar with, but when they do, they're absolutely amazed that this could even be going on in this country. Mm-hmm. So what is it all about? If you're arrested in this country, typically you get sent to jail. And when you go to jail, you have to await a hearing with a judge. And the judge will decide if you are a risk to be sent out back to the public awaiting your trial to determine if you're guilty or not. And typically, depending on who you are and the risk and the crime and the alleged crime that's involved, they will set bail. The bail being an amount of money that you or a loved one has to come up with, essentially, so as to ensure that you will return for your hearing when it is set to occur. For many people who have money, putting up bail money is not a big deal. They have homes that they can pledge, and it's an easy price to get their ass out of prison very quickly, particularly if you have a good attorney who's friendly with the whole system there. They get out really quickly. The problem happens when you're someone who has allegedly committed a crime and the judge sets your bail at $500 or $1,000 or $10,000 or whatever it is. And
Like
guess
Khalif
what?
Browder.
What's that?
Like Khalif Browder in New York.
Khalif.
Okay. And you don't have the money to put up for bail, and you don't have a loved one who has the money to be put up for bail. So what ends up happening is you end up cooling your heels in jail and until your case comes up. And this could be a couple of days, but more likely it's much longer. Many times it involves an out of jurisdiction case, and there's a bench warrant for you, and that's going to take months and months and months for it to be resolved. Or the courts are all backed up because of the coronavirus or whatever the case may be. And you are been arrested, and there's been absolutely no reason to think that you're guilty other than the fact that the cop thought you were guilty. There's a constitutional right that presumably we all have that's based upon the predicate that you're, innocent until proven guilty. That's what we all assume. That's sort of like, the idealized version of our criminal justice system. But the reality of it is you are thrown into the Seth was talking about county jail. I was in Rikers. And that is like easily one of the most evil places on the earth. And I was, thank God I was only there for a few weeks because I had a sister who somehow or another got me out of there, begged the attorney, get him, whatever, he doesn't belong there. But there are people there who are there for years. And when you're there for years, and particularly if you don't believe you're guilty, it's not hard to understand how your attitude might suffer a little bit. How you might get into trouble. How about when a guard hits you for the 11th time and you say, enough is enough, I'm not going to let this guy hit me. That when you had the opportunity, maybe if you were on the outside, you could help build your case. You could bring in evidence. You could find the guy who could prove your alibi that you weren't even there at the time. But you have none of this opportunity, and you're relying upon some poor schmuck of a public defender who has 9,000 cases, and even if they want to do right by you, they just don't have the means to do it. It's an impossibility. So you're sitting there in jails, which are not as nice as prisons are, and you are just being brutalized while you're there, day after day after day. And you can't get out of there, and no one has even proven you've done a thing wrong. And then, finally, you've been there for a long time, and then the prosecutor, the assistant district attorney, some young guy typically, who's trying to make his bones by getting as many convictions as he or she can, because he or she has aspirations within the criminal justice system to move on, they come to you with a plea deal. And you say, something? Going to prison for a couple of years sounds a hell of a lot better than spending God knows how long I'm going to be spending in Rikers Island. And so what do? You accept the plea deal. And by doing that, you have sealed the rest of your life that you have this felony conviction that is essentially a life sentence, that when you do finally get out, you'll never get a job, or certainly it won't be easy. You won't find a home. It'll affect your relationships. It'll affect every aspect of your life. And why? Not because you were guilty of something, not because even that you were young and you made a stupid mistake, but because some cop picked you up, threw you in there, and you didn't have the money to pay bail. That's a poor tax. That is it's just awful. It's just awful. And if that doesn't piss you off, I don't know what does.
Richard, that was a great one, man. You're gonna get a shot for inciting a riot with getting everybody riled up on that
for
one.
real.
Yeah, you're STG now.
And we say all you was doing was telling the truth. It's an insulin shot.
It's pretty fucked up.
Yeah.
And I salute the state of Illinois, and I salute Governor Pritzker for doing this. All that means is there are another 49 states that have to do the same exact thing. We're a long way off where anybody can talk about, equity in the system as long as that shit can go on. So, any event, that's my rant. I'm sticking with it. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Aaron, you are absolutely amazing. We could be talking to you for 3 more hours, and I hope you'll come back and hang out with us.
I'd be happy to, Richard.
You're so, and we haven't even gotten into how you ended up being a professor in college and what that's all about. I'm sure that's a fascinating story. And Craig, every time I see you, I just want to give you a hug and like, just hold on so that there's no chance of you going anywhere else but where you are right now. And your smile really does my soul a lot of good.
Yeah, hugs, man.
Absolutely.
So we're really
Thank
thrilled that you're our friend. What we do typically at the end here for people who just want to hang out. Last week we did this, and people were here till 2 a.m. in this room just hanging out. If anybody wants to continue, they want to connect, they want to make friends, they have something they want to share, please do. We love that. That's what we're all about. We ask you all to please tell your friends about the work we're doing. Tell your friends who have records to go to Commissary Club. Invite your friends to come to the yard if you like what we're doing. If you don't, or if you think we could do it better, please let us know. If you have ideas, we'd love to hear them. When I shut up finally, there'll be a screen that'll come up that'll have all of our contact info. Please follow us on Instagram, follow us on Twitter. And if you want to be a guest in a future episode of The Yard, Adrian's contact info, you'll see. Please contact her and engage with her on that. You know, there are 70 million of us with records, 70 million. And then there's about 100 million of our friends and family who are equally impacted by what we go through in the criminal justice system. That's like half the country. We could elect any president we want. We could get so much, we could make this world a whole lot better if we all came together, if we all looked after ourselves and each other. You know, if we were just available to each other and connected to each other. So please, when you have that opportunity, please don't squander it. Be there for each other. Thank you so much, Seth. A pleasure as always. Divine, you're my boys. I really appreciate time with you. And Aaron and Craig, you guys are amazing and inspirations. Peace, everybody. See you next time, next week.
Aaron, Craig, thanks so much. All right, guys.
Aaron, if you could stay for a second, I want to ask you a question.
Yeah, of course. I'll hang out for a bit. I don't know about 2 a.m., but because I ain't got no drinks on over here.
I wanted to ask you that. I didn't get a chance to like ask. I wanted to say, so I want to know how you said like you was learned behavior, how you became violent, right? And things that you took on and embodied and led to some criminal activity. How was it you didn't embody or you didn't get to learn behavior around the racism piece? How did you differentiate
that's really interesting. I don't know if I've ever really thought about that, you know, in depth. I think just really off top of my head, I think you know, it's because like the Black and the Latino kids were just like me. They were going through some really crazy shit. And I grew up a lot, at least in the beginning, my earliest formative years were in those communities that were predominantly people of color. So I think for me, maybe that was that youthful deep connection. And then I remember, you know, years later in my early teenage years going into the country and all these racist hillbillies always talking shit about Black and brown people. And I often would think like, you know, you motherfuckers are doing the same thing, if not worse, very often way worse.
It's accusing them of.
Yeah, so like, why? That's what I never understood. But I think the deeper part of it, Divine, is that it's more often than not, it's not this deep hatred, it's this misunderstanding and never having access to those communities. So maybe that's what did it for me as a kid, is that early exposure to Black and brown folks, like created that connection and understanding for me. But a lot of white hillbillies, they never even had that. They never seen a Black person out in the middle of the farm.
Right.
So they have to go, and I'm not saying that it's right at all, but what I'm saying is that their learned behavior is that Black and brown people are demonized in the media. So like, that must be a true narrative. Why would the media tell us bad things or lie to us? So I think that's the problem that we have, is that we don't have this cross-pollination of different racial and ethnic minorities.
Interaction, right.
Interaction, because
Right.
then there would be so much more like we're all getting fucked by the powers that be. More often than not, they happen to be rich white males from Eurocentric descent. But like there's rich black folks that don't care about poor black folks either. In all
Oh, yo,
honesty.
that's so shit. Who you telling?
There's money out there that don't care about
You made another good point though. You made another good point in your explanation in explaining that was that these individuals who are racist towards people of color, black and brown, are doing criticizing them for what they're doing. However, they're doing the same or worse.
Same thing, yeah.
And that speaks to the sense of privilege that America places on white America.
Absolutely.
Right? You have the sense of privilege, like, oh, even if you're poor, you
very
think
hypocritical.
you get that.
Mhm.
So it's amazing that you see all this, a lot of social media that comes out. You got poor white people acting like they're superior or better or privileged, and they're in the same situations as people of color. Yet they have this disposition that they're not, and feel that they're higher than them.
And I think Dr. King said it best, like in one of his last speeches before he got assassinated, is that if poor whites, blacks, and Latinos ever got together and we realize how the government is fucking all of us,
right?
Like
the
he didn't say it like that. He said it a lot more eloquently. But like, you know, if we all got together and realized like all poor people, I mean, certainly there's layers of it, but like if we all got together and worked unified, we could like not overrun the government, take it over like a civil, you know,
we could make
so much beautiful changes in this country and create real racial equality and like true pathway for all of these kids. And that's my biggest thing, Divine, is I want these kids, whether it's my kid or kids that are in the projects in Detroit, I want them to have a better opportunity than I had as a kid. And I want them to build on themselves and do something because they all have so much potential.
Yeah, I'd love to connect with you offline, brother. It was a pleasure having you.
Yeah,
love that. Sure. I can't wait to bring you back and like dig deeper into like the professor piece and how you entered into that academic space and do your thing. So thank you again, brother.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Absolutely. I want to hear about Cell Block 7 when you're on next too.
Oh, okay.
Cell Block 7. Okay.
They closed it down. It down.
Yeah.
So actually, ironically, Seth, another prison trip that I'm taking some students to from the University of Michigan this Sunday is in Mansfield, Ohio, called the Ohio State Reformatory. Mm-hmm. It's where they filmed the Shawshank Redemption.
Oh, interesting.
So like you see behind me, this prison in Ireland, very similar, this old school, late 1800s, early 1900s prison down in Ohio. That's where they filmed Shawshank back in the early 90s before they demolished.
Oh, wow, interesting.
But you can go in the whole prison block, the East Block, West Block, solitary, parts of the yard are opened up, but now it goes into like a medium facility that's like a few thousand yards behind where the old penitentiary was. But
it's all shut down? It's all evacuated?
It's all empty. They've converted it to a historical site, Divine. So their purpose now is to preserve this site for the historical value, but also they have tours come in there. I bring students and I give them my perspective of lived experience, but also, you know, the atrocities of the carceral state, you know, the way that they're treating human beings, and to allow a lot of these privileged college kids to sit in a prison cell. And I shut that door on them for a minute. Like, you'd be surprised the shock within just 30 seconds that these kids have. You know, and I let them know, like, there's people that did decades like this.
Yeah.
You know, that's their whole fucking life. Yeah. And I'm not saying people don't need to be punished when they do serious shit, but not like this.
No.
That we take it too far in America.
Well, I'm going to sign off. Thank you again, Aaron. A pleasure. To the audience, thank you for joining us. Please share, share with people, friends, family, individuals know that they could benefit from coming on and being in the audience of the yard. Thank you for joining us again, Seth. Always a pleasure, my brother.
Good seeing you, man.
Have a good night, everybody.
Have a good night, man.
All right, I'll hit it with you. Later, guys.
So it looks like pretty much all the hosts of the show have dipped out.
Hey, Aaron, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. I was muted and I just was able to unmute myself. Finally, it said hosts weren't allowing other people to talk. Really appreciate your story, man. I'm actually from Detroit, but I'm living in Florida at the moment. Are you in Detroit or are you in the Detroit area?
Detroit-esque. I'm over in
Okay.
Ypsi right now, so I'm closer to
Nice.
Ann Arbor, but I do a lot of work in Detroit. A lot of my clients and good friends are all over on the east side, and
Nice.
so I go
Yeah,
over.
I was living on a farm off Woodward, like
Oh.
basically in the middle of the east and west side last summer.
Cool.
So
One of those urban farming initiatives.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Sweet. I think those
So-
are a great thing for the city. I wish we would get more of those out here, like in Ypsilanti, because there's this huge divide. A lot of people don't know between bougie Ann Arbor
Oh,
on the
yeah.
west side of US 23, and then on the east side, kind of similar to east and west side of Detroit. You know, there's so much more resources in Midtown and further on the west side of Detroit as there is. So like
Yeah.
we get the short end of the stick over here in Ypsi where our office is. But I love working with these people. You know, they're good people that just need you know, a helpful hand and a pathway to kind of like help themselves.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. I would love to interview you. So